Good morning. It being 10 o'clock, we'll start on time. Uh, This is the organizational meeting of the Finance Committee, the House Finance Committee. New Hampshire Constitution gives us a unique role because we're closer to the people. So all spending bills must originate in the New Hampshire House. And the New Hampshire House has designated us as the Finance Committee to do that task. Budget by law can only contain spreadsheets. And you'll see that in the orientation. So HB2 is added. We call it the trailer bill. It has to describe all the changes that enable the legislation, such if we put in new legislation or if we change the law, change the tax, all that has to go in HB2. So when we get that, the budget's usually about 1,500 pages thick. And last time, the HB2 was over 300 pages. It's the biggest we've seen in my 25 years of looking at it. Usually it's 100 and some pages, but last year, over 300. If there's policy changes, I send those off to a policy committee for comments, and then they'd come back to us and we'd act appropriately. We have about 6 weeks to accomplish the task of completing the budget. So it's a pretty full-time thing. We'll be meeting Monday through Friday. Because of the room shortage and the spreading out and so on, Health and Human Services has been assigned to this room as well. They'll be using it mostly Wednesdays, and hopefully they'll use a full day so they won't have to go into other days. So it'll be ours Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and of course your committee rooms, except for Division 3 is a little different this year. I'm sorry, I got to pay a fine on that one. Excuse me while I silence that. Okay. So I owe now $5 for my phone going off while we're having a hearing. Okay, so we have a February 15th, the governor will deliver it to us if he's on time. HB1, he'll come in here and make a spiel and then leave. And he'll leave to his budget expert who's never done this before. So I'm pleased to have all the experience we have in this room to work on that budget. We'll go line by line, page by page. We'll compare it with what they spent last year. We might ask a comment. Was that successful? Did it cover everything? Was it more than you needed? They'll never admit it. Or was it less than you needed? And did we do anything in the law to make it a bigger project than it was previously? We have the ability to shift funds from one line to another with some exceptions. We try to keep personnel lines separate because that's where they quite often come in, and we've done some work, thanks to my vice chair and I, looking at other ways to count the number of employees. I asked the treasurer this year for a list of paychecks. So don't come in and tell me you have 800 employees when only 700 paychecks went out. So it's another way to cross-check that we're going down the right road, because everybody likes to put a little extra list of people in there and then come into us later and do a song and dance. Well, we'd like to give a few pay raises to some people, or maybe everybody. And we'll say, we only have so much money in that line. Well, we had a lot of early retirement, so there's a little extra money in there. Well, isn't that odd? You started with extra people in there that you didn't have. So we do our best to find them and take them out, because we don't want everybody to have a little slush fund. If you need extra money, come to us. We may find it in another agency, but don't expect every agency to have their own slush fund. So we have to find that and take it out. So you may have noticed that the House appreciates this task that we do for them, and that's why we have so much room. We have more room than others. As I started to say, normally we have the two division rooms across the hall, and Division 3 would use this room. And they're down to their usual, I think it'd be 8 people. And and they'd have a big room for all the people that come in from HHS, because that's the half of the budget they deal with. So because the Health and Human Services may be here Wednesdays, I've asked to give them the room downstairs, 104. So Division 3 may meet in 104 sometime. It's also been assigned to several of these extra committees that have been created on housing and so on that may also be meeting there sometime. So Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Division 3 may meet here sometimes. The other times they'll probably be meeting down in 104, depending on how what rooms are available. But it's nice for them to have a special room like all the other divisions. So we now have about 11 bills that come directly to us for the first committee. Some of them have been vacated by other committees. For instance, the one HB 50 relative to payment of the state of a portion of retirement system contributions to political subdivisions was vacated by ED&A. So it's come to us. And I think there's another one from education that dealt with the difference between 5,000 and 20,000 when they had to have a special meeting. So they vacated that. That's really a financial decision rather than any policy. So we're taking some of those bills up front. We'll probably deal with those hopefully before we start the budget work on the 15th. So first meeting for us, I'd like to introduce ourselves a little, tell a little bit about ourselves. I'll start. MIT graduate, went right in the Air Force to pilot training. Had 6 years of active duty, decided I liked flying airplanes more than doing chemical engineering, although there was some relationship, and went on to airlines as well as the Air Force Reserve and spent 38 years in my flying career. I've been in the legislature since 1990. I've been on the Finance Committee or its predecessor appropriations since 94. I think I had one term I was not on this committee since that time. And I've enjoyed the work. It's a challenge for us to figure out how to make everything work. And I quite often rely on alternative sources. Sometimes the people that come before us tell one story. If you happen to know or have a neighbor that works there, you might hear a different story, or if you run into somebody. So sit down and talk with those people, and you'll find out lots of things that we may not find out in these rooms. So use your outside connections to find out everything you can, and it will come in handy. And another thing that I'm proud to have is this group of geniuses we call the legislative budget assistants. They've got lots of years of experience in each of our divisions. Michael Kane, I consider him kind of the dean of the college because he trains all these people, as does his right-hand guy, Chris. Then the other state agencies steal them away. And you will hear us sometimes greet people that we have seen before, come before us in various divisions. Got a seat over here for you, Jess. And, you know, and find out about what they're doing in their new job. But they're used to talking to legislatures. They learn the steps and so on by this dean of the college. So anyway, Janet Clayman is a rare thing to have a full-time committee assistant. Most committees have to share them, but respect her space. We all going to contribute $20 for the goodies she stocks in the back room. More if we need it, but so we'll all have coffee and goodies when you come for a break. But respect her space. Don't sit at her desk or try to use her computer. Those are not for you. We have rooms, some places in the back. So, all right, I've introduced myself. My vice chair, Keith Erf, will go ahead and we'll move down that side and then up this side.
I'm Keith Erf, Vice Chair of Finance. Don't have quite the broad background that Representative Weiler laid out for us. This is my third term on the Finance Committee. Prior to that, and even currently, I have my own computer software business, and I'm looking forward to getting through the budget. Thank you.
Mary Jane Wallner, and I'm from Concord. This will be my 22nd term in the House, and I've served on Children and Family Law, Health and Human Services. For a couple of terms, I was the majority leader, and I have been on finance almost all the rest of the time that I've been here. I love working on Division 3 and working on the Health and Human Service budget. As a profession, I ran a childcare agency for close to 50 years, and feel very, very committed to children and families in New Hampshire, and really look forward to working with all of you.
Right on time, Peter.
Good morning. I had to laugh when Mary Jane said she took care of younger people. She's in the perfect spot here taking care of me, but anyway. So my name is Peter Leishman. This will be, I think, my 8th term on finance. I'm from Peterborough. And let's see, what are you telling everybody? How many terms you've served on different committees and that sort of thing?
Yeah, and what you do on the outside.
Okay. My life story, okay. Yeah. So I've been in the House 12 terms, so I still have a way to go to catch up with Mary Jane, but I served on environment and agriculture, election law, and judiciary, and I have a wonderful wife, a grandchild on the way, so that's all good news. So I guess that's about it. Looking forward to a good 2 years.
Hi, all. My name is Dan McGuire. I'm from Epsom, and this is my 4th term both in the legislature and on this committee, although I served for 3 terms and then took another 3 terms off and decided to come back. My wife is in her 8th term, and so I follow what's going on, and I know that we're part of the best legislative body in the country. There's no question about it. And so I look forward to this term. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Mary Heath, and I've been in the legislature since 2013. I came in on a special election, and I served 1 year on Health and Human Services, 2 terms on House Ed, and this is going to be my 3rd session on finance. I always serve on Division 2 because I'm an educator by trade, was a teacher, special ed teacher, worked as administrator as well, also served at the New Hampshire Department of Education. So I'm happy to be here, and it's always a pleasure to work with everyone. I really love being on finance.
I'm Jerry Griffin. I'm basically a financial guy, but like our chairman, I served in the Air Force. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I was a aircraft maintenance officer, took care of the C-130s in Vietnam. When I came out of Vietnam, I got my MBA. I sat for the CPA exam, kind of changed careers, and became a chief financial officer for private companies. I took one company private and I took one company public. I'm retired. At this point, I own the New Hampshire License Plate Museum. It keeps me pretty busy. This is my 3rd term. I tell people I've won 4 elections, but one of them I was reversed in a recount. I went from winning by 22 votes to losing by 8. That was quite a shock. But my first term was 2016, and I'm now in my 3rd term. Thank you.
Why is that doesn't work? Yeah, that's better. Thank you, Jerry. My name is David Hewitt. I'm from Laconia. This is my fifth non-consecutive term in the House of Representatives, and my fourth term on the Finance Committee. I started out. I graduated from St. Anselm College and from the Georgetown University Law Center and practiced law in Laconia. In 1970, it was my first time I ran for the House and was elected. Served 2 terms then, but the law practice got so busy that I really didn't have time for it anymore, so I got out. Further time passed, and I wound up, I got appointed judge of the Laconia District Court. I served there for 30 years. The year I got out, I went down to City Hall and filed for the legislature again. And I've been doing it ever since. Now, of course, Laconia is not a Democratic stronghold, so it comes and goes. But I've always enjoyed working on the Finance Committee. There are a lot of good people that work on this committee, and I'm looking forward for another great term this year. Thank you.
I'm Harry Bean. I come from Guilford. This is my 3rd term. I live on a piece of property that my family's owned since 1842. And I just got a great-grandson. He's Harry Bean the 6th. I'm going to do the best I can do on this committee. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Karen Ebel. I come from New London. I represent New London and Newbury. This is my 6th term in the legislature. I spent my first 5 terms on public works and highways, so spent a lot of time on the capital budget and the 10-year transportation plan. I was born and raised in Ossipee. My roots don't go quite as far back as yours. But I went to school originally for biology and biochemistry at Trinity College in Vermont. I then ended up at Georgetown Law Center, where I studied law, met my husband, practiced law, corporate law for several years, saw the light, and returned back where we raised our family in New London. I didn't practice law after that. I spent almost 20 years on the planning board, a lot of volunteer work, and now I'm in the legislature, and the legislature is my life.
Hi, I'm Laura Tolerski. I represent Nashua's Ward 8. This is my 3rd term. My first 2 terms, I served on House Transportation. I grew up in Nashua, went on to Georgetown University, where I got my undergraduate degree. And then I also have a degree from the University of Chicago, where I got my master's. And after moving around with my husband, who I met at the University of Chicago, we settled again in Nashua on the same street I grew up in. And I've been busy raising my 3 kids. I still have 2 in college. And I am looking forward to spending the next 6 weeks with all of you here in this room.
J.R. Hull from Dunbarton. This would be my 5th term, non-consecutive. In 2016, I had started an engineering firm, and after finishing out that session in 17 and 18, I took time off to grow the engineering firm. This is my first term on finance. Prior sessions, I was on House Education, ED&A, and Children and Family Law.
Thank you. I'm Jerry Stringham. I'm a graduate of MIT, like our esteemed chairman, but also Harvard Business School. I spent 12 years as a serial entrepreneur developing medical technology. I've been in healthcare my entire career. After 12 years, I had a couple of young children and switched over to consulting. I started a consulting firm about 25 years ago that's worked with over 200 manufacturers of innovative medical technologies, seen some great technologies and great companies develop. Particular expertise I have is in the healthcare reimbursement system, which every new technology needs to understand. I'm in my second term here. I served on Ways and Means from 2018 to 2020, and from Lincoln, and looking forward to serving on Finance 3.
I'm Sharon Nordgren. I represent Hanover and Lyme. And I was first elected in 1988. I spent the first few terms on what was called Children, Youth, and Families. Following Mary Jane, who was also on that committee, I joined her then on what was called the Appropriations Committee. We met in room 100 over in the State House. And I've always been on what you would call Division 3 Health and Human Services Committee.
Good morning. So I'm Representative Mary Hecken Phillips. I represent Grafton County District 12 along with Sharon. So that's Hanover and Lyme. Let's see, last term I served on Ways and Means, so I'm looking forward to seeing the other side of the equation here. Let's see, I'm an attorney by trade. I'm not currently practicing, but I also have a background in the financial industry in Chicago prior to going to law school. So I bring a little bit of knowledge with me today, and I'm just very pleased to join you all. And I look forward to, working with everybody here. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Daniel Popovich Miller. I'm representing Windham. I'm a freshman, so I'm new to absolutely everything in the State House and around the State House. I'm a naturalized citizen too, coming from Romania, which used to be a communist country, so there is that. I was also on the Windham School Board, which, trust me, there is no more unpleasant sort of election than the school board elections in Windham. The general the general court elections have nothing on that. I'm an engineer by trade originally. I never really practiced. I worked for a startup in my country until we left and moved to the US because my wife got accepted to Dartmouth College. So I hung around the Upper Valley for 6 years, and I love that part of the state. I got my BU, an MBA from BU. I used to have a CPA license until I stopped maintaining my CPE requirements during the COVID years, so that's technically no longer valid, but I did hold it for a while. I taught for a living for about 10 years, technical training classes, certified Novell instructor and Microsoft trainer. I then went to work as a database developer and software developer for a few years. Then I got my MBA and I ended up in government finance with Praxair, where I ran the finances for the healthcare division. That gave me a lot of insight into that particular industry. And then I was the finance director for the town of Windham for 6 years and a half, which ended this June, exactly 3 days before the end of the filing period, which gave me that wonderful opportunity to jump right back in and win my seat as, the first time House rep. I really appreciate your patience. I know there is a lot, but as I said, I'm brand new and I'd rather do it once for everybody. So thank you for the opportunity to serve here. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Kate Murray. I'm from Newcastle and represent Newcastle and Ward 5 in Portsmouth, which is generally considered the South End, one of the more historic areas of Portsmouth. I have doctoral degrees in music and in theology and taught at UCLA until kiddos came along. And my husband went computer sciencey. This is my third term on finance. I've been in the House for 4 terms. I first served on criminal justice. After that, I moved to finance here, which I have loved. It becomes, if those of you who have been here already know this, those of you who are coming on will learn quickly, it becomes pretty much your second family. It's a challenging, a really fun, really interesting committee to be on. So. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Jose Cambrils. I represent the towns of Canterbury and Loudoun. I'm a retired engineering executive from BAE Systems. This will be my second term. I served on science, technology, and energy the last session, and I am very honored to have been accepted onto the Finance Committee. I'm a numbers and spreadsheet type of guy, so I think I'll fit in very well. Thank you very much for having me.
Excuse me. Yes, good morning. My name is Tom Bucco. I currently serve as a state representative for Carroll County District Number 1, which is the town of Conway. I spent many years in the construction industry as an iron worker and a welder, and then I went back to college and got a bachelor's degree in business administration from Providence College. I've run for office 10 times and been elected 9 times. So you can see I don't catch on too quick. Keep coming back for more. On my first term, I served on Public Works and Highways and learned about the capital budget and worked on the 10-year transportation plan. And since then, I've served on this finance committee, in which I've served 1 term each on Division 3 and also Division 1. But this will be my 8th term on Division 2. And I really enjoy working on the budgets for Department of Transportation and Safety and Education and also DES. Thank you.
Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Maureen Mooney, and I'm from the town of Merrimack. That's Hillsborough County, number 12. I'm currently in my 5th term here in the New Hampshire House, though, like many of you, they haven't been consecutive. I was in from 2002 to 2008, and then reelected again in 2020. So I've gotten to see all angles of the legislature. During that time, I served on Judiciary and on the Rules Committee. This will be my first full term on finance. I was reassigned to finance last term, midway through, so I have a great introduction to the committee and to the people, and I look forward to working with all of you as I serve on Division 3 this time around. Thank you. Oh, and one more thing, if you don't mind. I apologize for the interruption of coming in and out. I have a bill to introduce in Judiciary, originally scheduled for 10:30. Turns out they're half an hour behind, so it looks like I'll be leaving again at 11. So please pardon that interruption. Thank you.
Good morning. My name's Tracy Emmerich. I'm from Hampton. This is my 5th term. My first term was in labor, and then I've been on finance ever since. Of course, I did take a vacation for 2 years, like many other people. Education, I have a bachelor's degree in philosophy, an MBA, and a PhD in business. I was self-employed with a database marketing company for many years, and of late I've decided to publish. I've got 2 books on Amazon. One was written about 2 decades ago, but I don't know how it reemerged. It's a business book, and now I've got a motivational book for sale online. Thank you.
I didn't know that about you, and I don't have anything to sell today. I wish I did. I'm Jess Edwards. This is my 4th term. They've been consecutive. I'm blessed to live in a very favorable district, so you're never going to get rid of me. Sorry. I want to point out Jerry Stringham didn't mention that he's the clerk of Division 3. Sharon Nordgren is our ranking member of Division 3. Maureen Mooney is our vice chair of Division 3, and this will be the 2nd term I've at least had an opportunity to start out chairing Division 3. A fun fact about me, I'm the only person in U.S. military history as a hospital administrator to have established a combat arms training center in a hostile fire zone. So all it taught me was, anything that happens in the legislature is relatively easy compared to that. I spent my career in healthcare administration. I had an opportunity to be on the faculty at Georgetown for a little while. I wrote just a textbook chapter on military telemedicine. Half my career was in the military, half of it was in hospitals and medical device manufacturers.
So I think I'm in a good spot in terms of my background because it's been combined with being on HHS oversight, Governor's Commission on Alcohol and Drug Abuse, the Telemedicine Commission, and a few other things. So I've been blessed to have kind of a holistic opportunity to view our state healthcare system. So looking forward to another term.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Joe Petrie. I represent Stratford District 1, which is Farmington. I started out in the military working on airplanes for guys like our chairman. And, you know, I didn't like that. I spent probably, I don't know, 10 years or so doing that. And I also worked, I cross-trained into crypto, which is electronics, and that was fun. I worked at a shipyard as electronics technician. Then I decided to go in business for myself in construction, and that worked out. I'm very active in my town government. I live on the same property that I grew up on, which that was 77 years ago, give or take. But going to again to Division II, this is my 7th term, and I spent many great days in education with some of you, and 2 terms in education, and then the other 5 terms here in finance, Division II, which is it's a great place. We got good budgets for great things, and you know, education's probably one of my passions. I got let me see, I got 9 grandkids, 4 kids, and a great wife, 55 years worth. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. We're missing 2 people, Joe Sweeney and Bill Hatch. We'll see them hopefully soon, and we'll ask them to introduce themselves a little bit. I appreciate all the good backgrounds and especially all the experience on other committees. When we get done with the budget, I will talk about having liaisons to the other committees. And using your backgrounds, I hope you can volunteer for them. And some people don't want to do any, so if you want to do more than one, that's fine. Basically, it is to deliver this message. We tend to be the bad guys. They work on a bill in the policy committee. They think it's wonderful. They send it to us. It needs a few $1 million, and we say no. And the message that I hope we can deliver is, you know this agency better than any of us. So if they want to add 2 new employees or 3 new employees for some new thing, look at the whole agency. Is there some area they're not working with as much as they used to? Can they take 3 employees and change them over to the 3 employees that they're asking for? Makes our job easier. You get to complete the bill. We get to be happy that we didn't have to raise new money. We can find it within the agency in most cases. So if it's a small amount, we don't get really upset. But the idea is, we don't want to be the bad guys. We want you to think about the spending within that agency as well as the things that go on in that agency. So now I get the opportunity to introduce the geniuses that keep this all going. And Michael Kane is the legislative budget assistant, has been doing it for many years. His able assistant is Chris True, and I'll leave it to him to introduce everybody and give a little rundown. Mr. Kane.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Weiler, members of the committee. I'll give a quick introduction of our staff. You'll be able to meet them and learn a little bit more about them after lunch when they go into the division for the orientation. But just quick, myself, my name's Michael Kane. I'm the legislative budget assistant. I've been working with the office of the LBA since 1999. So this is beginning my 24th year. Next to me is Chris Shea. He's the deputy LBA. He's also been working with the LBA in both performance audit capacity as well as the budget division for close to 27 years, Chris? Is that 27 years? That was a great guess on my part. And then behind me here, I have Mike Hoffman, the senior budget officer who has been working with state government over 30 years, both Mike and I started within within a week of each other back in 1999 with the LBA. Mike has extensive experience with both the legislative branch and the executive branch. Next to Mike is a new face for the Finance Committee, but not a new face for the legislature. Melissa Rollins used to work with Department of Revenue Administration, so the members who have been on Ways and Means have probably heard presentation. Melissa has 19 plus years of experience with DRA before we're able to get her to come over here with the retirement of Nancy Levinas, who some of you may remember. We lucked upon Melissa looking for a new opportunity. She graciously accepted our offer, and we're a pleasure to have her. In the back row, it's a little different story, but it's, we have Mickey Landrigan and Mick Landrigan, who's also a senior budget officer. Mick has been with probably about 15 years between audit and budget, been with our office for coming on 8 years, I believe. And Kevin Ripple, Mickey, actually, he'll deal with Division 2, Mike and Melissa with Division 1. Kevin Ripple behind us. Same face, still Kevin. He's going to be working with Division 3. He's been with our office for 15 years as well, between performance audit and the budget division, working with the budget division 7+ years. So I'm very grateful I get to work with these people. They're my friends and family back over in the office. It makes it easy coming into work. And also it makes it a lot easier for us to work with you and work with the legislature. So if I could leave it at that, I'll go right into the orientation.
I'm glad that you mentioned audit division and the performance audits. Those products are some of the most worthwhile if you're studying an agency. It may have been 3, 4, 5 years ago that they did an audit, especially if it were a performance audit. So if you want to know something about that agency, get a hold of an audit and read it, and it has a lot of good information about what's going on in that department. So I really like the output of the audit division. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll move into the orientation and quickly mention the LBA is a nonpartisan office. We do have about 30 staff split between our budget division, which are the people you see here, including Pam Ellis, who is basically running the operation back over in the State House, releasing fiscal notes, fiscal impact statements, and everything else we ask of her. So we're very grateful to have Pam working with us as well. Our audit division, we have both performance audits, as Representative Weiler had mentioned, which do perform audits based on direction from the Legislative Performance Audit Oversight Committee, and we also do our financial audits, split evenly right now between 12 and 12 between the two, who perform your annual financial reports, including the CAFR or the ACFR, the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report that was just released at the end of December. So before you have a 104-page document, which I am not going to go over line by line or page by page, more of a reference document we put together. If you do have some questions, it is online. If you do leave here and have some questions on some of the things we go over, or maybe some of the RSAs that may drive some of the activity, feel free to use this document as well as the one online. Just quickly on page 1 of the document is just the staff listing. I've introduced you to everyone here today, along with the numbers where you can reach them as well as their email addresses. And my staff is great at returning both voicemail and email. So feel free to get in touch with them at any time, at any questions you have. As far as we do have a section on common terms defined, what's an appropriation, what is a class line, we'll get into that a little more once we get the budget from the governor. But basically, right now, we're in the end of the fiscal year 22, the biennial 22 and 23 budget. We're in the governor's phase of developing the fiscal year 24 and 25 operating budget. So as you know, the legislature develops the budget almost 18 months before the fiscal year ends. So there's a lot of estimates, there's a lot of predictions and guesses that may or may not come true. It is a biennial budget. Not all states, as you know, have biennial budgets. A lot of them do this every year. I came from Massachusetts, where they did a budget every year and probably never finished on time once. So for New Hampshire to develop a budget 2 years out and not open it up, and when I say open it up, amend the budget many times, is a great it's a great effort by this committee and the Senate Finance Committee to put a budget together for the next 2 years, which is not an easy task. We have a couple, just going over into RSA 9. RSA 9 are the statute that drives the budget and it drives the what's included as well as timelines. Representative Weiler had mentioned the governor on February 15th required by statute under RSA on page 4 under RSA 9.2 is transmit to the legislature a budget. And this budget will be released on February 15th. The governor will provide give a presentation to the full legislature on that date or right around that date, and then submit to him what the governor believes the state should do for the next 2 years. That is one person's opinion. He does work with the agencies as he develops his budget to kind of put forth what policies and what funding levels he would like to see over the next 2 years. Page 5 was added in 2019, but page 5 is RSA 9.2a, transmission to the legislature, changes to statutory law. And this is a reference to what Chairman Weiler mentioned, the trailer bill. So the budget itself is a large document. Probably when the governor's budget comes out, it'll be over 1,200 pages of information with line items, the appropriations by the class, the class being the what's in personnel and the various other components of a budget, but really a technical document, not very user or reader friendly. What the legislature usually waits for, what the public also likes to see, what are the changes to be made in the trailer bill? The trailer bill is slowly becoming the size of House Bill 1 because there are many policy changes, statutory changes that are put into the trailer bill. The reason for that is because the Constitution does not allow the budget bill itself to include changes to statutory law. It can only deal with the budget, the appropriations themselves. You'll see things called footnotes, which might provide additional direction to the appropriations contained in the bill, but none of them change statutory law. If anything comes over or is, even from the governor is introduced or maybe from an agency, we make sure that any statutory changes or any legal law changes are put into the trailer bill to remain in compliance with the constitutional requirement. I'm going to skim over a couple of these RSAs and really just jump to a few. On page 11, you'll hear the question, is there a constitutional requirement to balance the budget for New Hampshire has a balanced budget? And technically, no, but there is a statutory requirement under RSA 9.8b, the adoption of the operating budget. In summary, that the estimated revenues should be sufficient to fund the estimated or the recommended appropriations for the budget. And the last sentence on RSA 9.8b is one that you'll hear or be discussed throughout the whole process. Nothing contained herein shall prohibit the use of projected lapses in determining compliance with the section. Very quickly, a lapse is basically an unspent appropriation. As I stated previously, the budget is developed almost 2 years in advance before the final fiscal year. Obviously, there's a lot of estimates on personnel. There's a lot of changes in personnel. People come and go, retire, leave. We also have estimates on maybe Medicaid caseloads or other caseload information that over the next several months will change. And as a result, that does leave some unspent appropriations. So historically, I'll get to a surplus statement a little later in this document, but when the balanced budget is proposed by the governor, you'll see a line on there which is a lapse. What's the lapse amount? And basically, it will be an amount that the governor assumes based on historic lapse figures or what he knows he's put into the budget, what may not be spent by the end of the year. And the reason that lapse is there, it does give the current sitting legislature and governor the ability to direct where that lapse goes. Absent budgeted lapse, if the lapse wasn't budgeted and just occurred naturally, that would be additional funds that would sit out there for the legislature to make a determination at a later point to either go into the rainy day fund or to be used for another purpose. When you're developing a budget for 2 years, that lapse does give the legislature some flexibility of maybe directing that to where your priorities are when you pass the budget. But that will be discussed. We'll be interested to see what the governor comes out in the next month, what he comes out with the lapse estimates. But historically, it's been about $60 to $80 million a year of a general fund lapse, and we're talking about $3.7 billion in general funds a year. So not a large amount. It's usually lower than 3%, but it is an amount, a chunk of change that this current sitting legislature can decide what they want to do if it happens. And that is just to kind of further on the lapse, that's just an estimate. It's not a statutory required amount to hit. It is necessary in order to balance the budget, and the executive branch takes the full responsibility for ensuring that the state hits that lapse amount to ensure there's a balanced budget, as is their that's their duty to make sure that it does end in a balanced budget.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question?
Yes, question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have we ever gone back and looked at the last 5 budgets or something to see how close the lapse estimates have been to what the actual lapse was 2 years later?
Yes, and we do have, I can share that history with the committee, but we do have a history of what the estimates were. In the past, it was, I'd say within the previous to 5 years ago, we'd usually be pretty close. You'd be getting pretty close to that lapse amount, and that's it. Beginning in fiscal year 19, maybe, we've been exceeding that lapse by, sometimes 100%. Where you'd have $100 million lapse in 1 year when you estimated $50 million. A lot of that having to do with the vacancies. There's a high vacancy rate with state employees. That's slow filling those vacancies, as well as other trends going down in other areas of the budget. 2 years ago, we exceeded the lapse by almost $100 million. This past year, that just closed, fiscal year 22, it was assumed $64 million lapse. We came in at $104 million, so over $40 million. And so, yes, as the House Finance Committee develops that is information that we will share, information that you will go over and talk with your agencies, talk with the governor and his budget director on why they came up with the lapse that they came up with when historically we've been hitting these certain amounts. So we will share that with the committee. Sure. Okay. So if I were to go to page 14, here's another RSA 913E, the Revenue Stabilization Reserve Account, otherwise known as the Rainy Day Fund. So at the end of each biennium, so at the end of each odd number year, any surplus remaining in the general fund is deposited into the rainy day fund, unless otherwise directed by the legislature. That is something that you're going to discuss with the budget that comes out from the governor and what the House and Senate propose over the next few months. By statute, that rainy day fund cannot exceed 2 years of general fund unrestricted revenues, plus any amount that has gone into the rainy day fund from settlements. From the AG gets settlements, the big ExxonMobil settlement a while ago, the Monsanto settlement that came through. 10% of those large settlement amounts go into the rainy day fund. So it's $30+ million in the rainy day fund just from settlements. But in total, at no point in time can the legislature, right now, based on the current law that was just passed 2 years ago, can exceed 2 years of general fund unrestricted revenues. Ballpark, because we're currently in the last year of the biennium of 23, ballpark's about $400 million, in which we are not at now. And I'll get into where we are right now. But the other thing to consider in the rainy day fund is it's going to be a discussion that the leadership has, and both the House and the Senate and the governor have, on where they're comfortable with that, where they're comfortable with having a rainy day fund balance. It's not necessarily what outside organizations may say is a good buffer to have against a downturn. It's what are all of you comfortable with? Because it is close to almost $500 million if you hit the cap. That is either being collected in taxes that aren't being used, or it is not being used for other services. And based on the emails you're probably receiving already, you know there's a lot of requests out there and ideas on what's a comfortable level. So it really is a discussion, overall discussion. If I were to look back in the last couple of years, that figure has been about $150 million. Is it? Previous legislatures have been happy. So what will happen is when you're developing the budget for 24, 25, if the revenues continue to come in how they're coming in right now, which is $200 million over the actual revenue plan, there'll be a discussion in the legislature over the next few months of how much of that you want to go into the rainy day fund and how much you want to use for maybe one-time areas, one-time projects, which has happened. And I do just want to mention that although there is requirements about 2/3 to be use money from the rainy day fund, there have been, since I've been here, suspensions of this RSA 913E for the last several, mostly every budget since I've been here. And what that allows is the legislature and the governor to determine how much they should put in there based on what they're hearing from everyone that you talk to during the development of the budget. So there are a couple other transfer provisions that are relative to the fiscal committee as we go through RSA 9 and then a couple other areas that we probably won't, you as a finance committee won't have to deal with, but we did want to put all of RSA 9 in there. On page 22 is, these are the deadlines for the 2023 session. And as Representative Weiler mentioned, 6 weeks for the House to develop a budget. That's compared to the Senate, who has basically the month of April and May to develop their budget. So the task of the House Finance Committee is a large task, a very complicated task in a tight time frame. 6 weeks sounds like a long time, but considering we're already on January 18th, we're waiting for the governor's budget to be released on February 15th. The turnaround is going to be almost about a month as you start to make all your decisions, to start drafting your changes to House Bill 2, to start getting that information back from the agencies to make the decisions you want to make relative to the House's position on the budget. So just the two I would highlight is the Thursday, March 30th being the last day to report all remaining House bills. That would include the budget under these deadlines. And what that means is that earlier in that week, that's a Thursday, earlier in that week, Monday and Tuesdays, divisions will be presenting their recommendations to the full committee so that the full committee can vote on what Division 1, 2, and 3 are proposing. And if we back up the weekend prior, that means divisions really will be wrapping up their work right around March 23rd, March 24th in order to allow time to put the documents together to present to the full finance committee for their final vote. Obviously, deadlines can change, but right now these are the deadlines that we're looking at. And if we turn over to page 23, the Senate. Now, the Senate will be watching everything the House is doing. So as much as they're not going to receive the document from the House until the beginning of April, they usually do participate just by watching, not asking questions, but by watching what the divisions are doing. What are the divisions talking about? Senate's also having conversations with the agencies, conversations with the governors during that time. So by the time they get the budget in April, they have a pretty good idea after the presentations by the finance chairs of what's in the House budget. They also, the Senate, I would point out, the Senate has the benefit of two huge revenue months for the state of New Hampshire. March and April are big revenue collection months. What the House Ways and Means Committee, Chris works with the House Ways and Means Committee. So over the next few weeks, and I think usually around the beginning of March, you'll get some idea of where the House believes revenues will go. The difficulty in estimating revenues is that March is such a large month for revenue collection that Ways and Means really has to use historical data and individual meetings with agencies to determine where they think revenues will be. Those revenues will be communicated with the chair of House Finance, with the division chairs, with all the members, and that will be kind of the target for the House Finance Committee to use when they develop the budget. When the Senate receives the budget, they wait. They find out what happens at the end of, they'll know what happened at the end of March, usually by the first week of April. but they wait to see how April will end. They'll have meetings with the agencies to kind of bring them up to speed on what they asked the governor and didn't receive, what they asked the House and didn't receive, or vice versa, what they did receive and maybe didn't request. But they'll use that month of April kind of information gathering. And then once the revenues come in at the end of April and the first week in May, they'll have a better idea of where revenues will go, and they'll start to make a lot of their large decisions in the month of May. Usually prior to Memorial Day is when the Senate has a good plan of where they want to end up. And again, Senate, very open process as well. So the House Finance Committee members are watching what the Senate is. They're asking us on what the Senate's doing with the budget, and we're just keeping that communication, knowing in the end that there'll have to be a resolution of any differences between the House and the Senate budget. And that's what gets me to page 24, which is a kind of a chart of the operating budget process. And, the TARP part usually works pretty consistent with what you see here, but over the last few budgets, I don't think it's been as easy as submission to the governor and passing. There have been some vetoes, a couple vetoes in the past. There have been instances where the House was unable to pass a budget, but then able to adopt a committee or conference budget with continued negotiations with the Senate during the development of theirs. But in general, the agency phase began almost a year ago. The agency phase being agencies start to enter into the budget system, the state budget system, the number of employees, where they think the current required programs should be funded in the next 2 years. Over the next, from March through October, they're working to enter that information into the system, to adjust based on any statutory changes that may be signed by the governor and passed by the legislature before that time. And then in October, on October 1st, release the agency budget requests, which are online significant documents. We did post them on our website. It's easier to find certain things with just a Control F on the document as opposed to a box full of paper with those documents, which is very hard to find. But basically what you'll find in there is your efficiency budget, which is what to continue operations and meet the statutory requirements right now. And also your additional prioritized needs, which is above and beyond what is required by statute at this point. The governor's phase is right now, and the governor has until February 15th, and will use every minute working with the agencies back and forth. Try different things. The governor's working on his estimates right now with the various agencies, DRA being the largest one. And that's also impacting his discussions he's having with HHS that might have $500 million worth of requests for other types of things that have been requested from them they think they should do, as long as other agencies. Treasury, you'll see in the agency budget request almost $100 million roughly between the 2 years. And that really has to do with the revenue sharing that's suspended every 2 years. But the governor's going through all that and having discussions with the agency so that on February 15th, they can present to you where he thinks his recommended budget for the next 2 years. In addition to that, typically you'll receive the budget document, House Bill 1, on February 15th. OLS, Legislative Services, will receive on February 15th, 2 years ago, since it has only been 2 years since required, they'll receive the draft document for House Bill 2. House Bill 2 being the trailer bill. And it usually takes OLS about a week, week and a half, sometimes 2 weeks, depending on how large, to put that into bill format. Now, you'll be meeting with the agencies in the meantime, asking them what is in House Bill 2, what is proposed by the governor, because all of that's going to be kind of show its basically introduce itself on the governor's surplus statement as well as the agency budget. So you'll have a sense of what's in House Bill 2. You just won't see the actual wording until usually the beginning, right before the beginning of March, you'll get that document. And again, this is something that started off in 1 or 2 sections and it's slowly over time morphed into a larger document, 300 plus sections for various reasons. One of the main reasons is yes, it does start off pretty big from the governor coming over, but there's almost 1,000 pieces of legislation that will go through the House and Senate this year and will maybe stall at one point. It may have a cost in the where you'll have it in Finance Committee and decide to hold on Policy committee has recommended the policy, but you're going to see if it fits into the budget. And so you wait, and maybe you decide to put it into House Bill 2 so that you have the funding necessary to implement that policy change that you want. As well as there may be some bills that the House is prioritizes. This is priority of the House. And if it stalls in the Senate, well, maybe that's something that the House wants to put into House Bill 2 to keep a position alive during a committee conference and at least have that discussion with the Senate when that comes. The Senate does the same thing. They're watching their Senate bills after crossover, what goes into the House, what passes, what's amended, and then maybe they work their way if it has everything's related to the budget. So it can be anything really. But there is usually some nexus with the next 2 years and with the budget. So you'll see House Bill 2 over the growing. Sometimes the largest parts of House Bill 2, over half, have to do with either the reorganization or combination of statutes, not the actual policy changes or the 2 or 3 paragraphs, but the larger ones. So I think Representative Edwards.
Question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You touched on this a little bit, but I've been trying to figure this out. Lapsing versus non-lapsing. If as we're approaching the end of the 2-year budget and there are monies that you're projecting for lapses, I think I heard you say that those funds could potentially be rebudgeted or reprogrammed and spent in some other way. What I've been trying to recall is the vehicle for doing that, because OLS is closed to us. So how do we, deep into our term, submit any legislation that would authorize spending elsewhere?
Yeah, some of that will find its way into House Bill 2. So as you go through this current fiscal year, you'll have until March, at least through the end of March. If the agencies are forthcoming, which what they think will lapse, you could put appropriations from the current fiscal year into House Bill 2. And that you've seen that in a few of the past budgets where you appropriate current year projected surplus funds, be it from lapse or revenue, for the current year, and that's how you address that. During the 2022 session, there were a lot of legislative specials, $300+ million of legislative specials, really based on the revenue surplus versus the lapse. The lapse amount compared to the revenue surplus we have has been small, but it still plays into that pot. So either through House Bill 2 or a legislative special in the second year of the session is how any of those additional dollars that haven't already been authorized or appropriated would get used.
Okay, so legislative specials. Where does that come from? Who gets to craft that bill for a legislative special?
Any legislator. You'll see legislative specials that are introduced into the Senate individually. For instance, 7.5% contribution to municipal retirement in 22 was a $26 million appropriation.
So I'm just to keep things going. So I'm just trying to make sure that OLS actually supports those, because sometimes they can be the roadblock to say, no, we're not doing any more work for you.
Yeah, so you might be past your deadline to introduce new legislation, but not a way around that, but a way in the process is to amend a bill that might be before you, where you could put, even though you don't have a chance to introduce a new bill,
sir.
you could
Okay.
add an amendment onto another bill. Yeah.
So one more follow-up. I anecdotally think I have noticed a trend towards asking that more and more of the budget be converted over to non-lapsing versus lapsing. Have you picked up on a trend? Is that my imagination or is that real? And if it is real, how significant is it?
It is real. It tends to happen in Division 3 in Health and Human Services more than any, because they do have some caseload and eligibility entitlement programs. Agencies may ask a lot for non-lapsing, but it's I would say they would rather make sure they meet their lapse estimate with any available funds as opposed to putting a non-lapsing component in the first year of the budget. The reason I say that, if you had an agency like Administrative Services, who the governor said you have to lapse $5 million by the end of the fiscal year, they really bind themselves if they make those funds non-lapsing, because they're going to have to look somewhere else instead of using the funds that would otherwise have lapsed. You do have HHS hasn't impacted the lapse too much because a majority of your lapse is coming from your vacancies, but a lot of your non-lapsing funds, debt services one, you do have some of your Medicaid programs are non-lapsing until the second year of the biennium. Those are more kind of cushions against unexpected activity or performance against estimates for some of the programs, but it doesn't I don't see it as a trend in the larger scale, but maybe on some of your larger entitlement programs, your $200+ million, to have that 10 or 12 million into the next year is sometimes really helpful for those agencies.
Thank you for that. That was very good. It's going to take me a couple of walks around that to really understand it. And I hope Mr. Ripple will keep training me on this.
Okay,
so.
sure. Yep. So House patch, Senate, and then committee of conference part of the budget is where House has its position, Senate has its position, and then you work out the differences within a small crunch time frame of usually under a week, and you all come to an agreement and then pass a budget over to the governor, who at the same time is still communicating with the House and Senate during the entire process on things that maybe he sees that he agrees with or doesn't agree with, but to keep those lines of communications open. And then the House and Senate both have one final vote, at least one final vote of adopting that committee of conference report. So it has to be something, not that the House Finance Committee is agreeing on, but something that you know you can bring back to your body and have pass a second time. What happens if it doesn't pass? Well, two things. The budget could be vetoed, which it has been in the past. What happens then is a continuing resolution. An option is to keep the funding of the current government. And this is based on a level that is agreed to by the House, Senate, and governor. It doesn't have to be the current year level. It could be the current year level plus, the current year level minus. It's happened back in 2003. It was the budget as passed by the legislature. It was a very short veto period. And what happens there is you'll have like a 3-month budget. Agencies will be given the ability to come into fiscal committee to accept above and beyond that amount. So it makes fiscal's job a lot harder during those 3, because at the same time, members of the fiscal committee are also negotiating what the final budget will be. But there is a way to get through that. Absent a continuing resolution, which hasn't happened, knock on wood, I like to bring everything up, is would probably be a government shutdown if you could have no agreement on a continuing resolution. Since I've been here, only since '99, that has not occurred. Usually over the 3 months of a cool down period or further discussion period between the House, Senate, and the legislature, some agreement can come. Sometimes that agreement has gone right until the end of September. Sometimes it happens right after Labor Day, but never say never. So we just kind of keep track of that. And, maybe 3/12 of a budget is not good enough. Maybe you need another week, whatever. It can be anything that the governor and legislative leadership want to put forward. And then we get into House Bill 1 on page 25. I didn't include all of House Bill 1. I just included kind of the cover page. So you see kind of what that looks like. The introduction paragraph on page 26. We have we call them footnotes, which is on page 27 and 28. And these are not statutory changes, but more restrictions put on some of the transfer or use of certain appropriations. Maybe some limits back of the budget cut on personnel would be included in here. Making sure that overtime and maintenance doesn't lapse. So these are all changes that are law, but they're not changing statutes. So they are, it is appropriate to have them in House Bill 1 as sections, but very small. And at the end of that on page 31 and 32 are your base revenue estimates. Here based on committee of conference, but for you, what you'll include in your House Bill 1 is your base revenue estimates from the House Ways and Means Committee for the General Fund, Education Trust Fund, Highway, and Fish and Game. And then just an example of what the budget looks like on page 33. Not a very reader-friendly document, not a very easy document to find things in. It's a very detailed account. It's an accounting document that is transferred over, basically turn a key, and then the legislature, the executive branch starts to spend out of those funds once that budget is passed. But on the top, I'll just go over kind of quickly, just the top. On the left-hand side, 02 is your category. So administrative, it's justice and public protection. So you'll have category 1 through 6, 1 being general government, 2 being administration of justice and public protection, 3 resource and protection, 4 transportation, 5 health and human services, and 6 education. You don't have to remember that here. The next 2 rows, 20 is an agency code. So justice is from the accounting, and the accounting system is agency 20. So any activity for the Department of Justice, any appropriations occurs under there. And then you have your, your activity. Your activity is Division of Legal Counsel. So 201010 is just another, just a figure. I'm sorry, just a, it's a set of numbers to keep track of everything that occurs under that activity, being the Division of Legal Counsel. So you might have multiple levels, but you can always sum up to that division. And then 2623 is a unique number for transportation under the Department of Justice. And we use that, we call that the accounting unit. All those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 digits, your accounting unit. And that's how the state budgets, and that's how the state keeps track of it after the budget. And then down, you'll see the classes. Your 010 is your personnel services. 013 is your unclassified personnel services. And then your class 60, 060, your benefits. There are several classes. Our analysts, as you develop your budget, will go over multiple with you as you get to each agency, because there are some that are unique to certain agencies, but a lot, most of them, majority of them are budgeted under the same. Your class 10 across agencies are permanent classified employees, and that's going to be the same for Department of Justice or Health and Human Services. And so that way you can summarize how much you're spending on a certain type of service by the class level. And then your source of funds down low, estimated source of funds. This one is a transfer from the Department of Transportation, so it's other funds, show up as other funds in the budget, but there's a sending account under the Department of Transportation to fund this, this arm of the Department of Justice. So this is what you'll see. This is what you'll use when Representative Weiler mentioned you'll go through page by page, line by line of a budget. When the governor's budget comes out, you'll have an actual history. So you'll have your 22 actual expenditures for every single accounting unit, your 22 actual expenditures, your 23 adjusted authorized, which are your appropriations plus any other legislative or fiscal or GNC activity that occurred prior to our date certain, usually August 15th. And then you can look at trends. You can ask questions on why do you have equipment? Why has it gone up? Why is your personnel increasing? If you've only spent, X on this class line in 22, what has changed over the last year to make your request go up by 20%, 25%? And it varies from each agency. So you'll notice those when the agencies start coming in presenting the governor's budget. You'll notice those big jumps, and you can ask those questions when you get there, and feel free to ask our analysts as well if you have any questions ahead of time once you get the governor's budget. And we do we learn with you when the governor's budget, because we really are not involved right now with the governor. Once it's released on February 15th, we do our best with you to kind of come up to speed really quick so that the legislature can start doing that.
Sure. Question?
Thank you. Just a very quick question. I think I heard you say that those 3-digit codes, object codes, or whatever you want to call them, are mostly consistent around departments, which seems to imply that the same code could have different meanings in different departments. Could you clarify whether that's the case?
Sure. There may be one or two. And I say there's your class 10s through 80 are all consistent across departments. There used to be, now this is probably 10 years ago, a class 90 that could be different across departments. It could be fish food versus purchase of copying supplies in another. Over the past several years, the Department of Administrative Services has worked to have unique codes for each agencies. So there should only be one or two. It's very rare now to have dueling class codes, to have different meanings, because they do like to develop specific. But I can't tell you 100% that there's not one like 523 class that might be used across agencies with a different description. But we have come a long way from back in 2003 with the class 90. If you got a budget report on class 90, it wouldn't tell you anything because it could include provider payments to Health and Human Services. It can include payments to UNH. So it's been a lot better since over the last 10 years to maintain that consistency and that accuracy in reporting. So,
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
okay. And then on page, sorry.
Thank you.
Yep.
What are class 40 and 42? These are fairly large items.
Yep. So class 40 is your indirect costs. So any overhead costs to be chargeable back to the Treasury. The state sets up this so-called statewide indirect cost allocation plan known as a SWICAP that is approved by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services that provides a rate of what is an overhead cost that other agencies incur on their behalf. Administrative services for any of the accounting reports, Treasury for the checks. So if you're an other funded agency, there is an indirect cost that you're required to pay. Now, those funds go into the general fund as other revenue. I'm blanking on how much that amount is. Could be $10 to $12 million a year. And basically that offsets any general fund costs from those other agencies. And then 42, your additional fringe benefits is your retiree health for non-general funded agencies or agencies who don't send administrative services specific funds. Retiree health is available to eligible employees based on the years of service. Department of Administrative Services has the large appropriation. It's general funds, but it also includes money from a retirement subsidy for a limited amount of employees, but also sending agencies, your Fish and Game, Department of Transportation and Safety, send their share of retiree health based on your current number of employees. So it's kind of it's not a direct charge based on what we're paying on behalf of your employees, but it's allocated to various agencies based on the number of employees that you have and the percentage of your budget that is non-general fund. And it's really to offset that general fund cost for state retiree health insurance.
Thank you. It's going to take more than once to sink in.
Yes, yes, it is. When you get to that line in Division 1, when you get to that line, one of your largest lines, retiree health, during the budget, you'll start to see that agency income, and it will make a little more sense.
Mr. Chairman, question?
Question.
Back to where you did the budget footnotes on page 27, right? So the Constitution does not, or the Constitution prohibits statutory changes, but can you waive a statute? Right? Is that what happens in the footnote section? Because you had mentioned earlier, right, that there's a 2/3 requirement for managing the rainy day fund, yet typically is overridden by probably a simple majority. Is that done in the footnotes? So you can't change the statute, but you can say ignore the statute? Is that a good way to think about it?
Yes, and that would happen in your House Bill 2.
Okay.
House Bill 1, when you see here, if there are any references to statute, it should be purely referenced for the House Bill 1 sections. But in House Bill 2, you can either suspend a statute or the term used is notwithstand. So basically ignore, as you stated, a statute or statute requirements if it is signed into law. Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. And then on page 34 is a document that you will see usually at the end of your process and this is a compared document. This is something we put online so that state agencies and the public and the legislature can keep track of differences between in this instance, the governor and the House budget. So when the House passes a budget, where were the changes made? This is a document that the Senate will use when they develop their budget to see what changes is made, but also the House will refer to. We'll have a couple compared documents put up on changes the Senate made to the House or the Senate made to the governor. And so we'll keep those documents on our website. These are large documents, usually 1,600 page documents, but they do have great detail on, a $4,800 change in hardware or software, just to kind of keep track of everything that was changed. And quickly on page 35 is the state constitution, Article 18A, which does state that, and I'm going to paraphrase that, no section or footnote of any such budget bill shall contain any provision which establishes, amends, or repeals statutory law. We do tend to, anything that ignores or notwithstands, we do like to put in House Bill 2 as well, just to keep with to make sure that everything is in compliance with the Constitution. And then House Bill 2, we didn't print the entire House Bill 2, which is 300 plus sections, but we did provide you with on page 36 through 43, 44, just what is included. You'll have a judicial branch sheriff reimbursement for cost of court security. You'll have a consolidate human resource and payroll functions, which I think we've seen for every budget for the last 10 years. Extending appropriation dates, making appropriations to certain funds, reducing tax rates for the meals and rooms tax, making any changes to tax law that make it into House Bill 2. Legislature has a choice. You either pass a separate bill with any tax changes, usually every appropriation bill comes to finance, but for tax changes, you can either let that pass on its own and we'll account for any impact on our surplus statement, which I'll get to, or you can include that in House Bill 2. If it's something both the House and Senate agree, usually let that bill pass. But if it's something you are having debates with the House and Senate on what's appropriate, you will have may put that into House Bill 2 just to solidify your position and fund your side. And then on page 45 is a small, when you receive these during the process, they'll be on legal size. This is the surplus statement. So this is a combined general and education trust fund surplus statement. This is a document, internal document we use to make sure that the legislature recommends a balanced budget. Again, this is, for this one on page 45, and this was developed on June of 21 for the next 2 years. So it's based on your revenue estimates, any revenue adjustments, which are any changes to taxes, any changes in appropriations that may impact revenues. If you had an agency that provides its net profit to the general fund and you increase their funding, but it doesn't increase their revenue, that could be a negative adjustment. DRA, sometimes they receive additional positions that could bring in additional revenue, auditor positions. So you may have a positive adjustment. So that's where we keep track of revenue adjustments. And then we have our budget appropriations, which are your House Bill 1 appropriations, just from the total page on the back, and then your appropriation adjustments. These could be individual appropriations for certain purposes, for 1 year, for 2 years, that are outside your standard operating budget. They could be one-time funding provided in the either current fiscal year or the next 2 fiscal years, or again, an impact from legislation that may have passed the legislature that could have an impact on appropriations going forward. Education, for instance, if you had a big policy bill go through education that changed your adequacy formula, and it passed the policy committees and went over to the Senate, vice versa, passed, we would make sure that although it didn't come to finance, we want to make sure that you account for it on your balance sheet. And so this is the best we do up to that point. And then you'll see on page 46, you do the same thing for highway funds. So Division 2, you'll be working with Mickey for the highway fund, both the revenues that are coming in based on estimates from Ways and Means, and then working with those agencies that use highway funds, which are Department of Transportation as well as Department of Safety. And there are a couple smaller hits from other agencies, but majority of those two. And then on the next page, your Fish and Game Fund on page 47, based on revenue estimates from Ways and Means, proposed budgets, and then any changes made. You'll see here on page 47, there was a change to Department of Information Technology appropriations. And since DOIT, as it's known, Division 1 we'll talk about, they spread some of their cost out to all the agencies. You will see impact on some of these other balance sheets for your non-general fund agencies. And so you'll see there, as well as the cost of a pay raise. There was a pay raise that passed in House Bill 2 years ago, and you'll see that there's a fish and game and a highway fund portion of that, as well as a education, well as a general fund. On page 48 are pie charts. Representative Weiler, these aren't all the pie charts we've done. I've just included a couple of pie charts, just a visualization of, number one, not only the size of the budget, but this more or less what each category that I briefly mentioned before. There's 6 categories. The total budget, all funds, was about $13.5 million for the current biennium for 22-23. HHS makes up about 43.4, or category 5, 43.4% of that pie. So you see the largest pie being under category 5, which is all Division 3. Yes.
Question, Representative Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Does this chart correlate neatly to what Division 1 and Division 2 do? I know I can guess which one is Division 3. But are these other 5 directly and completely correlated to another division?
No. So I can tell you, category 5 is absolutely Division 3. Division 2 kind of touches upon a little bit of everything. All of category 6. Division 2 takes all of category.
So can I restate my question?
Yep.
Because I'm so concerned about the new members of finance, can we get a listing of which division has what part of the budget?
Yes.
Okay.
We
I'm
do.
gonna pretend for now I already know it, and I just want everyone else to know it. So if we
Sure.
could put it in writing somewhere.
We can do
That'll
that.
be in the division briefings.
Yeah, I think that some of our analysts will have that handout for you, but what I can also do is do a pie chart by division, if that's helpful, just so you can see.
I wouldn't ask for that.
Doesn't take that long. So yeah.
Representative Murray for a question.
Do I have to leave too?
Oh, Mooney.
Thank you very much. Just quickly
Sorry.
to continue on what you were talking about with regards to the division breakdowns. I had a conversation with the Speaker's office actually about including those on the House website. When you click on the committees, each committee, yes, it breaks down into membership, but really each committee should break down in a very detailed description. And even further down, each division should have the categories you're talking about right there on the House website. Thank you.
Okay. Sure, and we can work with General Court Technology Services to give them that information so that they can put that in the drop down for Division 1. Division 1, basically high level, it's your general government under Category 1. It's your Category 2, other than the Department of Safety, because they're funded from highway funds. And it's your Category 3, except Fish and Game, since they're funded with Fish and Game. Division 2 being your Category 4 for transportation, your Category 6 for education, and then safety and Fish and Game. But we do have a listing of that we'll provide to all the members. On page 49 is just a high-level bar chart relative to the source of funding. So yes, $13.5 billion budget, but where does that come from? Well, we can see the top line. Federal funds make up a majority. They make up $4.2 million. When I say majority, they're the highest share, the largest percentage share. $4.2 billion. General fund coming in next at 3.3. Other funds are all your different agency income, but the largest one there, almost $2 billion of it, is your education trust fund, is another fund. I'm sorry, not anymore. The other fund is your insurance, your banking, your agency income lines, your transfers amongst the various agencies. Education fund at $2 billion has been broken out in the orange. Highway about $490 million, Turnpike 336, and then liquor, Fish and Game, etc. So DOIT being one of your largest other funded agencies because they do receive funding from every single agencies that use their services. And then on page 50, the LBA statute or the fiscal committee statute, there's a fiscal committee that is responsible for overseeing the budget when it passes, overseeing the additional funds that come through outside of the budget process, maybe some one-time funds or funds that aren't guaranteed for the next 2 years. Fiscal committee does have that requirement to accept and accept an expenditure of those funds, allow transfer of any budgeted funds you have in certain classes, unless there's limitations or restrictions. Fiscal committee will be the 5 members of the Senate, 5 members of the House that will oversee any changes to the budget as well as any funds that come in after. They're also responsible for appointing us. And then, sorry, you have a question? Yep.
Question, Representative Emmerich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it was at this point in the briefing in previous times when we talked about double accounting.
Yep.
And I just wanted to ask the question again. DOIT outcharges itself to everybody, but its budget is also part of this budget.
Yes.
So the departments are paying for it and DOIT is paying for it. So in essence, whatever DOIT's budget is for them, it's also found throughout all the other agencies. I just wanted to.
Sure. Yes. And if we go back to page 49, a majority of your other funds are the so-called, not a majority, but a large share of your other funds are so-called double counting. And I say double counting because in our, how the budget is set up is that an agency may have, let's say Department of Transportation, for instance, has a project that DOIT is working on for them, or just their normal support of for web development, for any other software. DOIT will charge Department of Transportation for those costs that are related to them. So what happens is you have your spending account. So you have your Department of Transportation make the actual expenditure, transferring it over to DOIT, and then DOIT showing the expenditure in their budget. Like, is it under their general administration? Is it under a specific? So you have both the receiving agency and the sending agency spending being double counted. What is in the budget? If we look to an old House Bill 1, if you look on the last, under, it's in the totals, but it's also under each agency. There's been a removal of the double counting, at least visually. So you can see of every agency how much of that is double counted. It's usually a couple $100 to $300 million each fiscal year, and to give you a real budget total of what the state is actually appropriating, so that you don't, you don't say you appropriated 13.8 billion when you were only really appropriated 13.5, because the 300 million is double counting. So that is a new development or new change in the budget bill itself that was implemented probably 2 budgets ago. That makes it a little more clear, because the double counting is an issue when you start to look at start to compare budgets.
Follow up.
So, thank you. So the 13.54 million or billion is net of double accounting.
It should be. I'll verify that. It should be net of the double counting. Yep.
Thank you.
Sure. At least from that side. Now you'll have DOIT show up as other funds, but you won't. The double counting out of the sending agency won't be there. So. And then fiscal committee. On page 50, they're also responsible for overseeing our office, appointing the LBA, overseeing the work of our staff, but also with the various transfers and accepting expenditure of funds. And then usually during the budget, that's one part of it, but fiscal committee historically had approved between $200 and $300 million a year of other funds, mostly federal funds. That come in. It might be one-time funding that's not an ongoing, or maybe the legislature has asked them to come into the fiscal committee to give fiscal committee another chance, or the legislature another chance to discuss these various programs. But what you'll see on the next several pages is not only what fiscal historically approves, but the increase of the additional fiscal approvals as a result that resulted from CARES and ARPA funds. So almost $1.6 billion in funds coming in through fiscal, which is not your standard run-of-the-mill fiscal items. Rarely, it has not been that high. It has been 200 to 300 million, with most of it coming from your HHS or maybe some environmental services state revolving loan funds. But with ARPA, I think you can see, I think I highlighted a couple of the totals. On page 65, we know that in 22, a total of $1.5 billion of federal funds came in through fiscal for 22. And then in 23, that amount being already in the $651 million of additional federal funds, and that's on page 72. So almost $2 billion have come in through fiscal, and that is only because of your ARPA funds. Your 1.25 billion in the first ARPA and CARES funds you received, and another $1 billion that was received under that program, as well as all the individual federal acts that have passed after passage of the budget, or are not going to be ongoing operating budget expenses, since the authority to use these funds does run out. Also on that fiscal committee reporting, you will see a column called general funds. And so there are instances where the fiscal committee is given specific authority by the legislature to appropriate general funds, not for every agency, but for specific agencies. Judicial Council for indigent defense, Department of Justice for litigation expenditures. Those will be two issues that Division 1 will be talking about, because historically those are agencies that come back and ask fiscal for additional general funds. They do have the discussion during the budget process whether or not to budget those funds in the operating budget. But historically, what the legislature has decided to do is to have them come back to fiscal committee if they need it. Department of Justice, for instance, it gives the fiscal committee a little more oversight into expenditures for outside attorneys or any other litigation expenses, as opposed to a block appropriation in the budget. But it's really up to the legislature what they're comfortable with. And then there are a couple other small instances where agencies can come in and ask for additional general funds in the events of emergencies or shortfalls. But not every agency has that opportunity. Only when fiscal is given that explicit authority from the full legislature. So just to clear up that. And then if I were to go all the way through the end of that document and to page 87, and I won't take up too much of your time, but the annual comprehensive financial report will be presented to the fiscal committee on their first meeting, which is next week from this Friday, so the 27th. Annual comprehensive report is the so-called ACFR, used to be referred to as the CAFR. But in this is basically 6 months after the close of the fiscal year. The state must have an audited financial report of all their expenditures and revenues and activity for that fiscal year. The CAFR this was what actually happened, and this is not going to change. I say that because the Committee of Conference documents and legislative documents on the surplus statements are purely estimates, but the CAFR in front of you is audited final and where we ended up. So on page 88, for instance, this will give you, it's kind of a summary of a general education trust fund on a surplus statement type presentation, but it will show kind of where you were, where you ended up in 22. For revenues, for instance, revenues, total additions, almost $3.2 billion. That was almost $400 million over legislative estimates back in 21. And then you have appropriations. You'll see a lapse line. You can see the $104.8 million under the deductions. 104 was actually lapsed when the committee of conference had estimated about 64, so about a $40 million difference. Additional appropriations are things that pass. When the budget passes in 21 or when it passes in 23, there may be individual legislation that passes that appropriates money outside of that process. So those would be accounted for as well. And then any transfers to the rainy day fund, highway fund transfers are directed by House Bill 2. That's why there's $50 million that has gone in. but the undesignated fund balance was $361.3 million. Now, that is the ending balance in 22. 22 being the first year of a biennium, that would automatically carry over. No deposit is made into the rainy day fund until the last year of the biennium, so the odd numbered year. So that 361, and that compares to during the committee conference, I think in 22, if I'm not mistaken, 67.4 was where we thought 22 would end based on the revenues and appropriation. So almost a $300 million swing, majority of that with revenue. So it's you're going to see when the governor releases his budget for 23, the fiscal year we're currently in, that's going to vary from what the committee of conference assumed back in 21. Largely because through December, the state is $200 million up in revenue. Now, again, March and April could change that, but we're in a positive variance. We started with a much larger balance forward. As a result, based on the economic briefing, which I think is online, that I had given a quick snapshot of where we are beginning 23, which I'll present again to House Finance once the governor's budget is released. But there was almost a surplus of $183 million in the general fund right now, just based on where our revenues are to date. Obviously, that can change. There'll be items that come to fiscal committee to spend additional general funds. There'll be additional revenue changes that occur. But the legislature, knowing that revenue in 22, did decide to appropriate almost $300 million of one-time funding for various projects. So the CAFR, you're in a good position, $159.9 million in that rainy day fund, and that doesn't include $100 million that was set aside for the YDC settlement. So the Sununu Center, $100 million. The legislature decided in 22 to move that out of the rainy day fund and set it aside for the YDC settlement. So it still shows on our books, but it's dedicated for that purpose. So the state is in a great financial position as we sit here today. But as with any budget, any estimates, we have no idea what's going to happen over the next 2 or 3 years. So, but right now you're in a great position. And as far as history, pages 80. Sorry, did Representative Edwards have a question? Sure.
Question, Representative Edwards.
So just to help us define a great financial position, we have external bond agencies that have rated the state. I understand we're a B plus state, or are we something else?
Higher.
Higher. I thought we were AA, depending on the rating agency. Yeah.
Okay, so we're in a AA status now in general.
Yeah, we're not the top, but we're not. We have a very good bond rating. We're just not at the top.
It just feels like it's gotten higher since I was on Ways and Means, and so.
Yep.
Okay. Well,
yeah,
good.
I can look.
That is great. I just wanted to know what great meant. Okay.
Oh, so great. I guess it's all relative, right? So at general education trust fund, you're great. If people start questioning you on your retirement system liability or
Not so great.
Yeah, they might not say so great. But as far as your current cash balance for budget purposes in general, you're in a great shape. So, yeah. And then as far as history, just kind of, the CAFR has great tables. This is, it's on page 148 of the CAFR. 89 of the handout, we put in a few of these historic, your schedule of unrestricted revenue for the general fund for the last 10 years. So you can see significant, pretty good growth in general fund revenues of $1.4 billion in 2013 up to 1.9. And that is after any tax changes that were made. So almost $2 billion in taxes. Page 90 being your education trust fund. You can see 10-year history back in 2013 through 2017. The education trust fund was in the education trust fund is a fund, and Mickey will go over it at some point in Division 2, but it's basically, it's a non-lapsing fund. And if in the event that there are not sufficient funds, the education trust fund, the general fund has to kick in. You'll see 2013 through 2017, based on the revenues and the expenditures coming out of the education trust fund, the general fund had to contribute. And that was like that if you look at the previous 5 years, same way. But over the last several years, you'll see that there's no transfers were required from 2019 through 2022 into the education trust fund, because the revenue going into that fund largest being statewide education, property tax, and business taxes, were sufficient to fund adequate education or your education freedom accounts and anything else that's a charge against that fund. And that's something the Division 2 will dive into and ensure that there's a balance, or at least the education trust fund is in a good position at the close of the budget. Mickey Landergan will be the one to basically keep track of that. So page 91 is education trust fund specific. What I showed you before was the general fund. On page 92 is your highway fund, and I'll fly right over the highway fund. But you can see in 2013 a $46.3 million balance in the highway fund. Your additions, your revenue into the highway fund were about $285 million in 2013. They're $281 million in 2022. So over 10 years, they've actually declined. But the balance in the highway fund is $111.6 million. That does include $50 million that the general fund had deposited into the highway fund last budget process. So absent that, you'd be in about a $51 million balance. But it does exist, and it does currently sit. Fishing game is on page 93. Again, just a kind of a 10-year history. Your additions, your revenues have increased from 11.5 in 2013 to about 14.9. The balance in the fund as low as 1.6 million. Actually dropped down to $401,000 in 2015 in the fishing game fund. But right now, because of the increases in revenues as well as additional general fund support, over the last few budgets, you're at about $9.8 million in the fishing game fund. And you're talking about a fund with revenues or expenditures right around the 11 million. So $9 million is a pretty healthy balance in that fund. And then page 94, I'll just go through this quickly. This is your schedule of state employees by function for the last 10 fiscal years. So this is what the CAFR reports. So you can see the numbers of state employees. These are both your part-time, your state full-time employees, as well as your part-time and temporary employees. And this is something that each division will go through with each agency. You're going to look at their staffing counts. You're going to look at you're going to talk about their vacancy rates. This will be it's usually a large discussion or a big discussion in the House when you develop their budget, because you're looking historically over what they've been appropriated, what they've been able to fill, and et cetera. So.
Further question?
Okay, as we came out of page 93,
Yep.
we had just summarized some of the statutory fund balances.
Yep.
And so now I have a trivia question that you may not know the answer to. Okay. The Prescription Drug Affordability Board, as it exists in current statute, it has the ability to set its own fees. And I think it's also set up to be non-lapsing and the ability to collect 125% of their budget and stuff. Are they gonna be? Do you know now how we're going to review that board? Are they going to have their own fund balance sheet that we look at, or do you want to talk about that offline, or
Sure. Yeah. So high level, there'll be the agency budget request, I believe, had a budget request for Prescription Drug Affordability Board. I'm sure the governor's going over it now and how he'll present the budget. If it's a dedicated fund specifically for that board, they will be able to provide you, maybe not down to this, your additions and your subtractions from that fund, and give you kind of a status of where they see they are now or where they think they'll be based on estimated revenues. So you could ask them for that, absolutely.
ask them for that, or the LBA will routinely provide it as in the same format as any other fund balance? Is it going to be different or the same?
It's a small amount, so we wouldn't do a separate surplus statement for each dedicated fund. So I would ask them specifically for that. We could prepare it with them for you, but there's over 300. There's hundreds of dedicated funds. So for this, the dedicated fund report, we would have it after the fact. But as you develop the budget, it's probably something you want to ask us for, and we'll help put that together. Sure.
And just a reminder, there are several agencies that are somewhat supported by fees, insurance, banking, and this one you just referred to with prescription drugs. So the idea is that it keeps it even. So as new banks are added or new insurance companies are added, they are able to adjust the fees. And that agency is expected to provide 125% of their costs, because their costs usually only reflect the salaries and the heat and light for the office and so on. But there's also kind of an unknown cost, which is the retirement system. So that's why the extra 25% goes in there, to ensure that they don't come to us later and say, oh, by the way, we're short on retirement contributions or fringe benefits or something like that. So there's some debate over whether that's the right thing to do. Some people feel there's too much influence by the banks or by the insurance company. There's too much coziness of the people that they're doing business with and being audited by, that they are also paying them directly. So there's some argument. We used to have something similar with labor, and we switched it over to general funds. Well, they were producing enough funds in fines and fees to cover their expenses. It was around $1 million something on that agency, but people said, oh no, this is too cozy and everything. So that there's an example of us switching, taking their money that they brought in, putting it in the general fund, and then paying them out of the general fund what was needed. So those are some things we've done in the past and we could still consider in the future. Thank you.
Sure. Representative Emmerich looks like he has a question.
Representative Emmerich.
Thank you. I'm looking at the growth of these restricted fund balances, and it looks to me like a lot of these agencies are developing their own rainy day fund. Because that's what it appears. Because it's like, what happens with this? This sounds like it's cash sitting there, but how does it get allocated to be spent?
Fiscal committee. So Fish and Game, for instance, if they want to, it's basically called the Fish and Game surplus account. So it's basically anything that's not budgeted. They can come to fiscal and ask for those funds, be it for overtime, sometimes for patrols, sometimes for equipment. Highway fund, their surplus, what fiscal will usually see is probably soon, probably in your February, March, they'll come in for winter maintenance, depending on, they'll use the highway surplus account. But they do need fiscal committee and governing council approval before spending that. So a little more flexible than like a rainy day account, since they do just need fiscal committee approval to tap into it. But they do also have the oversight of the legislature when they come back in to make sure that they're not constantly doing that. Highway, I would say, and you'll talk about in Division 2, the unrestricted revenue in the highway fund as a result of the road toll, is so-called gas tax. It's pretty steady, as cars become more efficient. And so, that's why the general fund had jumped in the past and provided more funding for them. But you can see that they're at a very 111 million, even with a 50 million deposit. So they do like to have some type of cushion. I don't want to speak for them now, but typically even the legislature wants to see the highway and the Fish and Game fund with some cushion. But what level you're comfortable with is definitely up to you.
We may get something passed in this session for all the vehicles that don't pay much into the highway fund because they're electric or they're hybrid fuels or something. So the biggest thing that goes into the highway fund is the gas tax, which is called the toll. And it's that's why we've had to put more money into them in the last several years, because the gas tax wasn't bringing in enough. Everybody was getting better mileage. And now we're going to these electric cars and they're going down the road with 1,000 pounds of battery versus 80 pounds of gasoline. It's a lot more wear and tear on the roads and they're not paying anything. So we've argued about that, but we've got to try to find some solution on that this next term. Hopefully Transportation Committee will find something and we'll be involved. Thank you.
Sure. And then just the next few pages. If I take you to page 95, this is really just a summary of your agency budget request. The first few pages are all funds, that's total funds, and then you have your general funds. Just based on time, is basically have your actual and your adjusted authorized for the current biennium, your efficiency budget, which is set out in statute, what should be included or not, your additional prioritized needs, which is the, for lack of a better term, your wish list or your suspensions of statute that require, changes. So you can see, and then your total agency request. These numbers will change dramatically year 24 and 25 when the governor's budget comes out by agency, because right now he is going detail to the level of the House usually to come up with what he believes should be provided. So,
What is the source of these? The agency request in November?
yes, the agency budget request, correct. This is the source of this document, the agency budget request that released that the governor had budget hearings back in November on those. And then just the last few pages, 100 to 104s, and your analysts will talk about it with your divisions, just on kind of how we can help you through this process. There's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of documents. Really, our job is to assist you in getting a document out, getting a budget out and passed from your committee. So you can see we like to keep you organized. On page 100, we like to put together indexes of any amendments that are provided. So when the divisions present to the full committee on here's what we believe this portion of the budget should be, that everyone can follow along. We'll provide you with, the section, whether or not there was an amendment. If there was an amendment, and the recommendation will include that. And you can see on page 102 just kind of examples of what those amendments look like. We'll work with legislative services to develop those amendments based on the discussions and decisions you have in your division. And then on page 104, it's very small. I apologize, I kind of shrunk it down for this presentation, but this is our detailed change sheet. This is a document we'll start the minute the House approves a change to one of the lines. We'll make sure that we keep track of this. This is something our analysts keep track of internally as the House Finance budget's developed, as well as the Senate and Committee conference, to ensure we're tracking everything. Also, to put some comments in there of, yes, there's a $175,000 and $225,000 addition over the biennium, but what is it for? So we like to put, if you look on the budget document, the compare report doesn't really tell you much. The detail changes to really provide a very high level, but a little more detail on like adding funding for the Small Business Development Center, making a change because of a change to maybe some employees. But these changes will add and foot to the compare report, which is a larger document comparing. So we think this is a very helpful document for our office to keep track of everything that the legislature does, but also for the legislature and the public to keep track of what's been changing. And that is all I have for now. Left a couple minutes.
You are
but,
excellent at timing.
Yeah,
And
I rushed through a couple. So
for the committee, this reminds me of an old military expression, drinking from a fire hose. You're not getting much, and a lot of it's splashing around your ears, but these are handy things to hang on to, and if you want to refer back to them, and of course you'll have your genius experts within each division that will give you more details as you need it. But I am so happy to be working with the LBA all these years. These people do a great job, make us produce a great product. We couldn't do it without them. So I'm
Thank you
delighted
very
to have
much.
all you people here.
thank you.
Further questions about the material? Too many to answer. JR, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Page 94. So you're giving us a 10-year look back, right, regarding some level of funds, right? In this case, right, this was state employees.
Yes.
At what level do you have that by department? So within Division 3, for instance, would you have that for DHHS as a whole? Would you have that for within divisions as a, right? How far down could you do a statement like that?
So that would require Health and Human Services. My guess is they should and have been asked in the past to provide a history by division, by accounting unit of, when I say accounting unit, one function of the number of employees. So they should be able to provide that to you, and historically have been able to provide that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Second question.
If I could just add to that, the second strategic topic that we're going to review in Division 3 is manpower, where they're going to break it down into that level. And if you're not satisfied with the breakdown that they come ready to give us, we can ask them questions, and we still have a few weeks to get them to respond. So,
Thank you. Second question, page 9.
Something here to add.
I believe the budget actually has the counts for every one of the accounting units of the people in those.
On page 96, if I'm reading this correctly, the departments have requested almost $16.3 billion over the 24-25. Is that?
That is correct.
And that's jumping from roughly 13.5 in this current budget?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Representative Memrick?
Yes, I still call it the CAFR. When are we going to get the printed?
So we have hard copies ready to, we'll bring them over probably later this week. Fiscal will receive their hard copies on Friday. I mean, before Friday. I think this Thursday is the mailing. But we'll make sure that we drop off with Janet 25 copies for all members as well. So very shortly, by the end of this week.
Any further questions? Seeing none. All right, we're going to go to your divisions at 1 o'clock and get into more detail of what each division will do. And we have the experts here to guide you. Thank you, Mr. Kane, Mr. True, for backing him up if needed. And we'll see all the rest of you in divisions. Thank you very much.